People think about what happens more than what doesn't happen. We think about what we'll do today, not what we'll prevent ourselves from doing as a product of our self-control, our constraints on dithering. We think about bringing order to our lives more than we think about the prevention of disorder. We pay more attention to our to-do lists than our to-don't lists. Yet many big scientific breakthroughs came from thinking about what doesn't happen. To understand evolution, Darwin focused on the organisms prevented from surviving. Communications theory's biggest breakthrough, binary bits, came from thinking about messages not sent. The second law of thermodynamics, which should be called the first law of everything, that everything tends to degenerate, resulted from thinking about how unlikely orderly configurations are. It turns out that constraints, or unlikelifications, explain a lot. Now, I collaborate closely with biologists who focus on constraints, how they emerge and change what happens. I apply what I learn in that collaboration to thinking about everyday life. It's why I think of my everyday life as like driving on winding, uncharted roads, constraining myself to stay within the constraints on both sides of the road. I think of our behavior as a product of our self-constraint, self-control, self-discipline, or deliberation, and our accumulated external constraints. And I think of them as grooves that help limit our behavior down to the range of habits that keep us grooving through life. Now, when our external grooves are reliable, we can ignore them or assume that we're running on self-control alone. If you've had a supportive partner and satisfying work, you can feel like you're self-made. But sometimes our external grooves widen, get wonky, or wash out, leaving us poorly and shallowly head. Your partner leaves. Your friend turns on you. You lose your job. Someone important to you dies. It's like the path giving out on a hike deep in the woods. It's a disorienting, ungrounding feeling just when you need to feel grounded enough to get your bearings. You become disoriented, unmoored, flustered, skittish, hypersensitive, flailing, defensive, what I call fragile and rigid. You lose your resilience. You're easily thrown off balance just when you need your balance most, so you find the next external grooves to hold you. So I call it the Undone Conundrum, trying to find your new groove when you're most freaked out at having lost your old one. It's how folks end up in disastrous rebound relationships, how people who hit rock bottom don't always climb out into a healthier groove, how when the going gets tough, people lurch into cults simply to be held again. It's why when we're flustered, we should count to 10 but are too upset to want to. It's why we remind ourselves to turn the other cheek but can't when we've been slapped. And why grace under pressure, or more accurately, when depressurized by the loss of external containment, is so hard to achieve. You've heard the saying, don't just do something, stand there. It's like counting to 10, or like the line from the Tao, have you the patience to wait for the mud to settle and the water to clear? In an emergency, you can't afford to, but often you can't. You just don't feel like it. So here are some suggestions for what you can do if you find yourself in the undone conundrum. First, distract yourself. One way to pause when you don't feel like it is to upstate your anxiety and ungroundedness with something stimulating. Parents often distract tantrum-throwing toddlers, and it works for adults too. When I've lost my groove and need time to calm down, I might watch a lot of engrossing TV just to pass the time. Of course, that can become an unhealthy groove too, like drowning your sorrows in booze. But within reason, it can enable you to ease into your disorientation in ways that help you reorient in ways you won't regret. Self-grace. I like the mantra, I just have to be sad for a while. A self-soothing sentiment that settles me down because it reminds me that reorientation takes time. Say what you need, but carefully. When you've lost your external groove, you'll have to rely more on your internal ones, which you're likely to try to firm up with self-affirmations, like it's not my fault, no regrets, and I'm perfectly fine. Many people scorn their exes and the meanies out there who dealt blows to their external grooves. It's therapeutic, but can be taken to excess. It can lead to what I call I once was lost, but now I'm blind syndrome, where feeling the sting of a lost groove and resolving never to feel such pain again, people lurch blindly into any groove that reassures them that they never will. Gradually, subtly learning. As the mud settles, water clears, and we calm down, we can visit more carefully the question of what, if anything, there is to learn from the loss of our external groove. The question always comes down to what we can do with what we're dealt, not how the world should be different than it is. Sometimes there's nothing to learn. Sometimes there's a big lesson to take from it. More often, there are minor adjustments to make, a tweak here and there, not the big whipsaw of I once was lost, but now I'm blind. Eventually upstaged, with patience one can find new external grooves, engaging and true enough to the life you want to live and can afford to live. And they will upstage your grief, disorientation, and frigidity, again, fragile rigidity, of having lost your groove. But give it a beat, because it takes time to settle down and get your wits back when you've been thrown into the undone conundrum.